Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia Daf Nun Zayin. Moadim l'simcha to everybody. We're going to get started with the third line of our daf, Amar Rava. So Rava now quotes Amar Rav Chasa. He quotes this Rav Chasa who says that by Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami asked the following question. Remember learning in our Mishnah that Ona'ah does not apply to four categories: land, sanctified items, slaves, and documents. So now Rabbi Ami asked the following question: Ona'ah ein lahem, bitul mekach yesh lahem, o ein lahem. So we understand there's no ona'ah, which means basically if we overcharge 6 or underpay 6, we can't get the money back and say, we can't do that with those items. But what if it goes over a 6, the discrepancy? Can we say this was a mistake? The deal was a mistake like we saw before. Does that apply in these four categories? So Amar Rav Nachman Hadar Amar Rav Chasa Pashit Rabbi Ami. So after Rabbi Chasa quoted Rabbi Ami as asking this question, he now quotes Rabbi Ami as answering. Rabbi Ami is answering the question. Ona'ah ein lahem, bitul mekach yesh lahem. So there is no ona'ah, but there is a cancel. If you go beyond 1/6, there's no deal. Rabbi Yona Amar a hekdeshan. Rabbi Yirmia Amar a karkaot. Now we have a debate between Rabbi Yona and Rabbi Yirmia. We're going to see in a minute that they actually debate what Rabbi Yochanan himself said about this. So one says that it's only talking about hekdesh here, and one says it's only talking about land here, right? So sanctified items or land. Utravayim Mishnaic to Rabbi Yochanan, and they both said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that ona'ah ein lahem bitul mekach yesh lahem. Okay, and they all said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that he said there is no ona'ah at 1/6, but there is bitul mekach at above 1/6. The whole deal is off. But they deliberated, well, not deliberated, but they debated whether Rabbi Yochanan said it specifically on sanctified items or specifically on land. So now we're going to say the following. Manda Amar Akarkaot, the one who said that he said it about sanctified items, Kol Shekain Akarkaot, he would obviously then say it about land. Okay, so why is this so obvious? We'll get to it in a minute. Manda Amar Akarkaot aval hekdesh lo. But if you say that Rabbi Yochanan said it about karka, that there's a canceled deal if you go beyond the 1/6, but that would not be the case for hekdesh. Okay, so now we have to understand why we go in this direction. So let's look to Rashi. Rashi explains, Kol shekain, to karka ot nami amar. Obviously, if he said it on hekdesh, he's going to also say it on land. To kevad ashminam, because we say de bitul mekach la bechlal ona'ahu, mehechaimit. Okay, let's go to the explanation here. If you're going to say, in other words, what does bitul mekach come from? It comes from that it was a bit mistake in the deal. Now, you might say there is no such a mistake when it comes to God. There isn't such a thing when it comes to sanctified items. Okay, why is that? It's a very good question. Why do we say there's no mistake when it comes to sanctified items? So first of all, it could be that, first of all, what's missing in sanctified items is, although we're going to get to that later, really more that there's no other side to say, oh, well, I don't care, okay, because it's the temple. We can't speak for God. But also you could say that once you give something to the temple, you maybe wanted to give more. In other words, you can't say I made a mistake. You sanctified it to the temple. It belongs to the temple. And another thing is that all these laws are between people, right? This is something, it's a totally different realm. Putting it in the domain, we're talking about the temple. These laws weren't even relating to that at all. And yet, for all these reasons, okay, so I'm going with Rashi and then I'm adding other possibilities. Hekdesh is more on the outs. So if you're going to say that even though there's no ona'ah, there is bitul mekach by this, then all the more so, koshkein de legabe chavre. This is why I think Rashi was talking about the chavre, the fellow human. You could say when it comes to another person, maybe you could say, look, you made a mistake, and I never would have done it based on this mistake. Koshkein de hadar, right? When there's someone on the other side, it's much more likely to say, oh, listen, I never really meant this. I never would have given this to you, or, had I known. You can't say that when it comes to God. Like, we don't know what God's thinking. So if you're going to say it applies even to the sanctified items, then obviously you're going to say it applies to categories that maybe weren't included in ona'ah, but have to do with human and human relationships. So for all those reasons, or again, it's not 100% clear exactly what Rashi is most getting at here, but there's this concept of if it's going to be for hekdesh, then obviously it's going to be for other things as well. But if you say it for lamb, then you wouldn't necessarily say it for hekdesh. And how do we know this? That the kiddush shmua, but hekdesh maybe not. How do you know that bitul mekach potentially there's reason to say it wouldn't work by hekdesh? Kiddush shmuel, as Shmuel said, Amar Shmuel. Hekdesh shava mana shechililo shava pruta mechulal. Remember we learned this. If you take something that was hekdesh and it was worth 100 dinarim, and you redeem it onto a coin which is worth a percentage of a dinar, a very small percentage of a dinar, it actually is effective, right? You're talking about a small percentage compared to 100 dinarim. It's still effective. So what do you see here? By hekdesh, it's much less likely that we're going to have what we call a bitul mekach and say, oh, this isn't good because look, he says it even works like this. So that's our what we got so far. Rabbi Ami asked a question. He answered the question that there is bitul mekach for these things, although we have a debate within what Rabbi Yochanan said about whether it's specifically land or it also includes sanctified items. Now we're going to bring a Mishnah in Tamura. Okay, to understand, you need some background. What is Tamura? Tamura is when I say, I have an animal I designate for a sacrifice, and then I say, you know what, I'm going to remove the sanctity from this animal and put it on a different animal. Now, I'm not allowed to do that, okay, even if I find a better animal. But if I do it, it works, meaning, well, how does it work? Well, it doesn't work fully. It works in that the second animal is sanctified, but it doesn't take away the sanctity of the first animal. This is if the animal is able to go on the altar. So then the Mishnah said, and I'm going to just, before we read the Mishnah, I'm going to read Rashi on the Mishnah, on the words of the Mishnah here, Imaya Kodesh Ba'amum, to the first words of the Mishnah, but that's not important yet. Rashi is going to bring the background to the beginning of the Mishnah, because kind of getting a Mishnah in the middle here. So Rashi says, Reisha Nemat Nitin Hachi. Ha'omer, this is what it says in the beginning of the Mishnah. Ha'omer Harei Zo Tachat Zo. It's a Mishnah in Tmura on Daf Kav Amud Bet. If you say this is in place of this, Zo Tmurat Zo, this is a substitution for this. Zo Chilufei Zo, this is instead of this. Harei Zo Tmurat, that's effective. Again, it's forbidden to do this by Torah law, but if you do it, both have sanctity. But if you say Zo Mechulelet Zo, but if you use the language of, let's say, redeeming Maser Sheni fruits onto coins that we've been talking about recently, that's not a language that's effective when it comes to sacrifices. There is no such thing as chilul, so it doesn't work for it, okay? Chilul is to move the sanctity, to redeem it onto something else, so you haven't actually done anything. So the second item isn't sanctified, and obviously the sanctity isn't removed from the first. And that's because she'ein korban tamim mitchalel, because a korban, it's an animal that could go on this altar, is valid to, it's good, it's not unblemished, can't be, there's no chilul for it. But now the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, sorry, now let's go back to in the Gemara, Im haya kodesh ba'amum, but if the animal that I sanctified became blemished, and then I actually can redeem it, yatsa lechulin, if I say zemechulal al zeh, and I basically redeem it onto another animal, it works. V'tzarich la'asot lo damim, but what? I have to add extra money if I'm off, okay? If, let's say it was worth 100, the first animal and the second one was only worth 80, I have to add another 20. So now we're going to have a machloket Rish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan about this money. I'm a Rabbi Yochanan. Yatzach lechulin divrei Torah. Okay, the fact that this becomes chulin, that's for sure. In other words, the first animal, there was a Baal Mum, I now move the sanctity onto the second animal. The first animal is total non-sacred anything. But sarich la'asot lo damim midivrei, but the rabbi said, since I took something that was only 80 and wasn't 100, I have to fill in that difference and pay the 20. But that's only by rabbinic law, not by Torah law. By Torah law, this whole thing is effective. Rish Lakish Amar, af tzarich la'asot lo damim min haTorah. Rish Lakish says, no, you have to pay that difference by Torah law. It's not really a done deal until you pay the difference. Okay, that's a Torah law obligation. So now we have to figure out what kind of difference. How much of a difference? Within ona'ah, without more than ona'ah, add a 6, more than a 6, less than a 6. So we're actually going to bring 3 possibilities. B'ma askina, what are we talking about here? What kind of difference in price was there between the first animal and the second? If you're going to say exactly at 1/6, how can you possibly say that the Torah said you have to fill in that extra 6? Didn't we learn in our Mishnah? There is no law of ona'ah, so it can't be that. Ella, so what must it be then? Bitul mekach. What's the other option? More than a 6. Now, then we're going to have an issue with Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Well, Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yona, what did Rabbi Yona say? That there is bitul mekach when it comes to hekdesh. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan said, he claims. So now we have a problem because what? Wait, Rabbi Yochanan said, if I have a difference of more than a 6, what should happen? Bitul mekach. It should be canceled according to the way Rabbi Yona understood Rabbi Yochanan. If it's supposed to be canceled, then why is it only midivrehem that you have to fill in the money? It should be by Torah law you have to fill in the money. V'hama Rabbi Yona, right? So Rabbi Yochanan says tzarich lasot l'damim midivrehem on a rabbinic level. Hama Rabbi Yona ahekdesho. Rabbi Yirmia amar hakarka. Oh, we're quoting the whole machloket, but really we're only cared about Rabbi Yona. Rabbi Yirmia works perfectly. We say, oh, it's only on land, it's not in hekdesh, right? And the mekach isn't canceled, and it works, right? And only by rabbinic law do we require the extra. And Travayim Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan Amri, and they both said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, no na'ah elam bitul mekach yesh lahem. They have bitul mekach, and according to Rabbi Yona, that applies to hekdesh. So how can we explain this? To which the Gemara is going to say, well, la'olam bitul mekach, and this is the first way of reading it. It is a case of bitul mekach, but what? To Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan switched the opinions. Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says by Torah law it's a problem, and that matches what he says about bitul mekach, according to Rabbi Yochanan. And Rish Lakish is the one who said, oh, it's only rabbinic. And then you resolve the issue. And then we want to understand, well, if you're going to switch these opinions, or even if you don't switch these opinions, but my kamiflige, what's the root of the debate between them? So we're going to have some possibilities of understanding what the root of the debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Bidish Shmuel, could be they disagree about the Salach of Shmuel we quoted before, the Amar Shmuel, Hekdesh Shavamana, Shechililo Shavapruta Mechula. If you take Hekdesh, that's worth 100, and you redeem it onto something that's worth 1 coin, it works. So, Mar'i Le Shmuel. So Rish Lakish now, who we said says that it doesn't work. It's not a problem by Torah law. It says because we hold like Shmuel. And Rabbi Yochanan, who now says, and now that we switched, Mar Le Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan, who says that by Torah law it's a problem, you can't do this, would then disagree with Shmuel. That's option number 1. Option number 2, Ibai De'ema, you could say, everyone agrees with Shmuel. How you can explain Rabbi Yochanan, who says doesn't, right? It's bitul mekach. The whole thing is canceled if you didn't give the right amount. Well, what they're really debating is the following: Mar savar shechililo in lechatchila lo. Well, one is saying that when Shmuel says that it works, he means it works if you did it, but you still, in other words, the first item is redeemed. But by Torah law, you still need to fill in the extra money. In other words, I took something worth 100 and I redeemed it onto something worth a coin. So now I have to fill in all that extra money. But the fact is it's effective if I did it. I shouldn't do it ideally because I shouldn't do that kind of thing because by Torah law, I have to pay the same amount. But if I did it, it's okay, meaning the Kedusha left the first item, but I still need to fill in all the missing money, and give it to the temple. Mar savar afilu lechatchila. And Rish Lakish, who says that by Torah law you don't have to fill in the money, thinks even ideally, like from the start, if I want, I can just get up and say, listen, I'm redeeming this onto something that's worth nothing. Rabbi Yochanan would say, you can't do that, and if you do it, you have to fix it, but it's effective. Rish Lakish would say, you can do it no problem. You don't even have to fill in the money, only by rabbinically. And here's a totally different way of understanding. Let's just go back for a minute. We started by saying perhaps their machloket is in a case of ona'ah, and that can't be because Rish Lakish makes no sense, because everyone agrees there's no issue of, the first reading of Rish Lakish, that by Torah law, nobody thinks there's an issue by Torah law of ona'ah when it comes to hekdesh. Then we said, well, it must be bitul mekach, and then we had to switch the opinions. And then perhaps they were arguing about whether they agree with Shmuel, or perhaps they were arguing they both agree with Shmuel, but disagreeing about whether it's l'chatchila b'diavad. Comes the third explanation, says it's not ona'ah, it's not bitul mekach. What are we talking about? A smaller difference. less than ona. There was less of a sixth of difference. Now, what are we going to explain here? Below tipuch. And this, by the way, you wouldn't have to switch Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Why? Because the whole problem with Rabbi Yochanan was the fact that we were talking about bitul mekach, and it contradicts what he said about more than ona. But now we're not even talking about that. We're talking about less than ona. So what's the machloket between them? So if there's less than a sixth of difference, do you have to fill in the money or not? So now what would happen in a regular sale? It wouldn't be an issue. You would just, right? You would say, oh, when I find out later, well, usually there's what we call mechila. You just don't care, right? It's not that much of a price difference. You're willing to pay that much more without making a big deal about it. But first of all, when it comes to hekdesh, there is no mechila. There's no one on the other side to be mochel and say, oh, I don't care. So perhaps, and this is what Rav Chisda says, what does it mean when we say there isn't ona'ah for these things? We don't mean there isn't ona'ah. It means they don't fall into the usual rules of ona'ah, which is a sixth. Moving out amabet, the chiddush about there not being ona'ah for hekdesh is that even less than a sixth, you can get your money back because, like I said, there's no one on the other side to do the mechila and say, oh, I don't care. And therefore, you can get your money back if you overpaid, or if you underpaid, you have to compensate, like our case. So now the whole debate is, do we hold like Rav Chisda or not? So Rish Lakish, who said in the original version, by Torah law, you have to compensate the difference, fill in the difference, is because he holds like Rav Chisda, that we're much more strict when it comes to ona'ah for hekdesh, as opposed to what we've been thinking until now, that there's no problem of ona'ah. And then we have Rabbi Yochanan who says, no, I don't agree with Rav Chisda. I take it like we originally understood, there's no ona'ah at all, right? Bitul mekach there is, beyond a six, yes, but anything a six or under, there's no issue. Now we're going to bring a contradiction to Rav Chisda from this following Tannaitic source. Ribit v'ona'ah lahediot ve'en ribit v'ona'ah lahekdesh. There is interest problems, right? You can't loan on interest for a regular person, and there's laws of ona'ah for a regular person. But there's no rebate and there's no ona'ah for hekdesh. That sounds like there is none at all. And not like Rav Chisda said that there is and it's more severe, more strict. To which the Gemara says, why are you questioning us from this? Mi'alima mimanitin. Our Mishnah said the same thing. There's no ona'ah for hekdesh. And what did we say? We said, well, Rav Chisda just means there's no laws of ona'ah, meaning the sixth is not relevant. Even less than that, it's a problem. So same thing. Why is this any stronger than our Mishnah? The question, do kimna b'torah ona'ah? There we said our Mishnah is talking about there's no rules of ona'ah. The typical rules of ona'ah, the definitions of ona'ah don't apply here. We have different definitions and it's more strict. Hachanami, the same way we said about our Mishnah, we'll say it the same thing here. So now they say, wait, hachanami, ribit v'din ona'ah lahediot, ve'ein ribit v'din ona'ah lahekdesh. So the same thing we're going to say here. There's ribit and ona'ah for hekdesh, and there isn't ribit and ona'ah for there isn't rebate and laws, the details of ona'ah for hekdesh. So we can say the same thing. Okay, so the same way we say, right? We're going to say it means din ona'ah. There is for hediot, there isn't for hekdesh. Okay, and again, we just changed ona'ah to din ona'ah, just like we did in our Mishnah, no problem. But the Gemara says, what do you mean? How can you answer that? But look at the end of that braita. It says, Zeh chomer behediot mi behekdesh. It says this is a case where a regular person has a stricter law than hekdesh. Usually, hekdesh has more strict laws. In this case, regular people have stricter laws than hekdesh because there's no ona'ah and there's no rebate. So it sounds like it's more lenient for hekdesh and not like Rav Chisda is trying to say it's more strict. To which they answer, a rebate. No, that line could be just referring to the interest. Because interest, actually, it's less strict when it comes to hekdesh. We're going to have to understand, by the way, what are we talking about? There's no rebate for hekdesh. What would be a case of rebate of hekdesh? We'll get to that as soon as we finish this section. Right now, we're just trying to resolve this source being a contradiction for Rav Chisda. And in doing so, we're going to say, we now have a problem. We thought it meant din ona'ah. That what it really means is Rav Chisda. It's more severe. But it now says, wait, but this is more strict for a hediot, not for hekdesh. We say, oh, don't worry about that line. That's just talking about the interest. When it comes to and it's a little bit weird because the source, this braita, puts together rebate and ona'ah. But what we're really saying is with ona'ah, we're more strict. With ribit, we're more lenient. Okay, but let's accept that we say that. But if we say that, then there should have been another line in the Braita. Because the Braita, after bringing these two laws, where one is more strict and one is more lenient, then it said, and by the way, this is a case where hedyot is stricter than hekdesh. Well, it should have said then, should have brought the parallel, like often Tanaitic sources do. In this way, this is more strict than that. And in the other way, in ona'ah, then we have hekdesh being more strict than hedyot. So again, we're stuck with, can we really explain this Braita to fit with Rav Chisda? To which the answer, yeah. Because hachi hashem, with this we'll finish this section. Because ribit is a very unique case because it's where we're going to actually be more lenient for regular things than we are with sanctified items. And really, there's not a lot more else. So it says, this is a way that we have something more strict laws about unsanctified items than we do with sanctified items. And that's a unique law. But to say, ala hekdesh, ze chomer bitulo, you're going to say what? When it comes to ona'ah, this is strict. This is stricter. This is where you see hekdesh is more strict than hedyot. What? There are not more cases than a million cases where we're more strict with sanctified items than non-sanctified items. So it'd be strange to say, this is where you see that we're more strict with hekdesh. That sounds weird. So that's why they didn't mention it. And therefore, in the end, we can possibly explain the source again. It's not the simple reading of the source, but we can read the source according to Rav Chisda, who says that basically there are stricter laws of ona'ah when it comes to hekdesh and even less. And that was all to give another explanation for a possible reason for the debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, whether or not they hold by this law that Rav Chisda said. Ribit to hekdesh hechidami. We still have, before we get to the next section, and by the way, the next section is going to be super easy and review from things we've seen already. But ribit of hekdesh, what's the case? What is the case of interest of hekdesh? So, well, the gizbar is the treasurer. They collect money in the temple. Let's say he takes the money and he loans it out on interest. Okay, so he gives a loan from the temple money. First of all, this is interesting because this gets to, can you invest money of the temple? Apparently you can't, because we'll see in a minute what happens. V'halo ma'al hagizbar. It's forbidden for the gizbar to do this. If the gizbar takes the money and uses it for a loan, you can't use hekdesh money for a loan. It's sanctified money. That's using sanctified money for unsanctified purposes. That's me'ilah. Now, what happens with me'ilah? Besides, you did something wrong, the actual item that you use as if it wasn't sanctified becomes unsanctified by your action. So me'ilah turns sanctified items into unsanctified items. Well, then, when I loaned you the money, let's say I'm the treasurer in the temple, when I loan you the money, it immediately becomes chulin. If it's chulin, then how can I possibly take interest from you? That's basically, they became unsanctified, and now it's like regular money that I'm loaning you on interest. Of course, I can't do that. I'm a Rav Shai, so we're going to have two possible answers. I made a deal. I sell solet, which is fine flour, and the temple needs solet. So when I sold you the solet, you're the treasurer. Okay, let's switch people, but it shouldn't confuse you too much. There's not too many people here. I sold you solet for the temple. And at the time we made an agreement, I was going to provide you with solet for the entire year. The price was 4 se'ah for a selah. And that's what I told you. Whether you pay me or not, it's not clear. I don't think it really matters. But I'm going to provide you every month with X amount of se'ah, right? Let's say just every month, 4 se'ah for this one selah you're going to pay me. But then I'm dumi shalosh. But then the prices went up and it now costs 3 se'ah for a selah. So when you get your 4 se'ah every month, you're actually getting back more than what you gave me. You gave me a selah and I'm giving you back a selah's worth plus an extra third because of the price change. So that I'm allowed to do. And it's not a ribit problem. That would be an example. How do we know this? Keditanya, how do we know that you can do this? It says in a Braita, if that was our agreement, even if the price is switched to 3 for a selah, I still have to give you the 4. And we're not worried about ribit. So that already proves it, but we're just going to bring the end of this Braita. Mishalosh v'amdu me'arba, if it was the reverse and the prices went down, then misapek me'arba. I have to give you 4 for a selah, even though I told you I was going to give you 3 for a selah. Now the prices went down and the selah is worth more, or the selah can get you more wheat, more flour, I have to give you more flour because Yad Hekdesh ala El Yona. The temple always wins out. Okay, so the gains will go to the temple and the losses will be on me if there are losses. So now what do we see here? But the main point we see is that it's not considered interest. So in this way, the temple can loan on interest. It's not really a loan. That's why it's a little bit of a weak argument because, again, we've seen rebate comes up in these other kind of cases as well, but it's a little bit weak to say that this is rebate. This is the case of rebate that they're talking about. But maybe perhaps that's why Rav Papa brings a different answer. Rav Papa Amal, they're now going to find something that belongs to the temple, but is not sanctified. The problem with it being sanctified was our issue we had right in the beginning of this sugya, which was once I use a sanctified item, it turns it into chulin. And if I loan that, it's no longer sanctified. But now we're going to have something that doesn't become sanctified till later. And that's because of a unique law that Shmuel says. We'll get to that in a minute. But we're going to say, we're talking about the bricks or the stones that we're going to use, the stones that we're going to use to build the walls and the temple. Now, why is that? So let's explain. Let's say somebody donates stones to the temple. So when they get to the temple, they belong to the temple right now, but they're not sanctified. Most things, when they belong to the temple, they become immediately sanctified. These do not. Why is that? Shmuel said, if we do that, we're going to have a big problem because, first of all, you might lean against the stones while you're building, and you might sit on them if there's a pile of stones. Or when you're sanding them down, you're going to sand down sanctified items, and that's a problem. You're wasting things, right? You're destroying things that are hektish. You can't do that. So because of that, they ruled the things that go into the building are only going to be sanctified once they actually get in as the wall. And only then they become sanctified. So now we can have a case where if the Gizbar loaned them out, so the stones belong to the temple, but they're not yet sanctified, so there's no laws of Me'ilah. So while they belong to the temple, if the temple loans them out, since it's the temple, there's no interest. So if I loan you 3 bricks as the treasure of the temple, and you bring me back 4, that's not interest. Okay, and that's a possible law about what it means. There's no rebate for hektish, for sanctified items. Okay, now we're going to move on to back to the Mishnah of these 4 things: land, slaves, sanctified items, and documents. And we listed a whole bunch of things in the Mishnah. There's no laws of kefel, no arba chamisha. Shomer chinam doesn't have to take an oath, doesn't have to pay for if they don't take an oath on theft or loss, they don't have to pay. And a nosei sachar doesn't have to pay for the things normally a shomer sachar would have to pay for. Where do we get this from? And they're all going to be the same. And by the end of this, you'll hopefully be reciting it in your sleep at night because we're going to say it so many times. And it's stuff we've learned before. So here goes. How do we know there's no kefal payment? What we're going to do is we're going to bring brighter each time. Where do we get it from? Titano Rabbanan, the brighter says, and we're going to quote a pasuk. This one is Shmo Kafbet, pasuk chet. I'll call Dvar Pesha, I'll read you the whole pasuk. On any wrongdoing, I'll shor, I'll chamor, I'll sell sama, for an ox, a donkey, a sheep, or a shirt or dress. I'll call a veda, share your mark, on any lost item that you say, this is it. Right? That's the whole thing about moed b'miktzat. Ad Elohim yavod var shnehem, you'll come to the court. Asher eshun Elohim, they rule against this person, not in their favor. Yishalem shnaim l're'eh. If you're the one who stole it, you'll have to pay double payment. So there's the kefil. So now what does the pasuk say? I'll call dvar peshet. That's a klal. That's a general. It's a general statement. Anything you did wrong. Then it gets specific. Al shor, al chamor, al sel, sama. That is a prop. Okay, that's a specific detail. Al kol aveda shir yomal, on any sort of lost item, that's already a generalization. Chazar v'kalal, klalu pratu. So it went back and went to generalization. Klalu pratu, klal, what are the rules? How do we do a klalu pratu klal? What do we say? Iyatadan elakena prat. Everything is, this rule applies to anything that's similar to the details. So what are the details? Right? Shor, chamor, se, salma. Mahaprat miforash davar mitaltel is something that's movable. V'gufo mamon, it has actually inherent value in the body of it. Af kol davar mitaltel v'gufo mamon. Anything that's movable and has inherent value. Yatsu karkaot, so out goes land. She'ena mitaltelin, it's not movable. Yatsu avadim, out go slaves. Shukshu the karkaot, because they've been compared to land. We saw that comparison before. Yatsu shtarot, documents are out. She'afal pi shemitaltelin, they are movable, but en gufam mamon. inherently they have no value. It's not valuable. The paper itself is almost no value. It's what it says in it that's important. And hekdeshot, why not hekdesh? Amar kra re'ehu re'ehu velo hekdesh. It says your friend. Friend means friend, fellow human, not the temple. Okay. Velo tashlume arba avachamisha. Well, once there's no kefil, there's no arba avachamisha. We learned this in Bava Kama also. My time tashlume arba avachamisha marachmana velo tashlume shlosha arba'a. Now, what is arba avachamisha? It means you pay the keren principal, you pay the double payment, that's 2, and then you pay an additional 2 or 3, depending if it's a shor or a set. Now, if you get rid of 2, you don't have kefil, then you're going to add 2 or 3 more. You're going to end up with 3 or 4 and not 4 or 5, and there's no such thing. So once there's no kefil, there's no arba v'chamisha. Shomer chinam no nishba minahane mile. Now we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to bring a braita, Tanu Rabbanan. And now we're going to quote the pasuk about a shomer chinam, which is ki tein isha re'eu kesef o kelim lishmor. If you give your friend money or vessels to watch, v'gunav mi beit ha'isha, and it's stolen from there. Imi Metzia ganav v'shalem shnayim. If you find the thief pays double. Meaning, but the person doesn't pay double the shomer chinam. Ki tein isha re'eu klal. That's general. You give anything. Kesef o kelim, well, money or vessels. That's a prat. V'gunav mi beit ha'isha, and it's stolen from the person's house. Some people actually say lishmor is the general rule. Here, that, and not some people. In the sugya we saw in Bava Kama, that's what it said. But here they quote the next words, which is v'gunav mi beit ha'isha, and it was stolen from there. It sounds like anything that was stolen. Chazar v'kalal, that's already a generalization. Kalal u'pratu klal, yetadan elakena prat. So now when you have general, specific, general, we say whatever's like the specifics. Well, again, what do we have here? Kesef, money, or kelim, or vessels. It's something that's movable and has inherent value. So anything that can move and has inherent value. Yatsu karkaot, we're going to go through the same thing again. Karkaot are out because they're in a metaltalim. They're not movable. Yatsu avadim, shukshu the karkaot. Slaves are compared to land. They're out. Yatsu shtarot, sha'afapisha metaltalim, and gufam amon. Well, shtar is out because it doesn't have inherent value, even though it is movable. And hekdeshot, again, amar kra re'ehu, which means your friend, and lo shel hekdesh, not hekdesh. Next, nosei sachar, last part for today. Eno mishalem, minahane mile, Tanu Rabbanan, ki tein isha re'ehu, we're at next pasuk, which is Shmot kafbet pasuk tet. Ki tein isha re'ehu, chamor, or shor, oseh, bechol behema l'shmor. So, a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any animal to watch. You can see where this is going. Okay, so we don't need to read the rest of the pasuk, but that's the pasuk about a shomer sachar, someone who gets paid. Ki tein isha re'ehu klav, give anything. Chamor, or shor, oseh, prat, detail. V'chol behema l'shmor, chazar v'kalal, again, generalization. Kalal u'pratu klal, yetadan elakena prat, ma prat mifurash davar mitatel v'gufo mamon, just like the details are movables that has inherent value. Av kol davar mitatel v'gufo mamon, it has to be movable and have inherent value. Yatsu karkaot, I hope you know this by heart already. Yatsu karkaot, she'enim metaltalin. Land is out. Yatsu avadim, shikshu the karkaot. Slaves are compared to land. Yatsu shtarot, she'afapish metaltalin, and gufam mamon, right? They might be movable, but they don't have inherent value. And hekdeshot, amar kra re'ehu velo shel hekdesh. And that's how we got to exclude all the things it said in the Mishnah. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll go to the next section tomorrow because it's going to start with the source that's going to mostly be on tomorrow's daf. So let's just do a quick review. We had the question of Rabbi Ami, is ona'at. There's no ona'at for these 4 things, but is there bitul mekach, of which we had an answer that there is, that it's canceled if it's above a 6, but with debate about what Rabbi Yochanan said, whether it was on land or whether, which by the way, land would include slaves as well. It doesn't really talk about shtar. Land only, or also hekdesh, and from hekdesh, if we did it on hekdesh, it would also be true for land and then for slaves. And then we had a problem with this understanding of Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. So either we flip the understanding, right, because we assume it's not talking about on'ah, must be talking about bitul mekach, and then we flip the 2 opinions, who said what, and then we had some possible explanations of that, of what the root of the machloket is, or perhaps their whole debate was about less than on'ah, and that was whether they agree or not agree with Rav Chisda. Then we brought a question on Rav Chisda, and with that we got into this other thing about the rebit for hekdesh and what that was. Then we basically just went through the cases in the Mishnah. There's no kefil, there's no shomer chinam, there's no laws of shomer sachar. Those things don't apply for these 4 items, and we learned that all from the details brought in that case and from the klal u'pratu klal way of darshaning the Torah. With that, we finish for today. Modim u'simcha to everybody.